The red ships filled the sky like angry storm clouds. Admiral Taemin pressed his face against the cracked window of his command bridge and watched his home burn. The Vorthak Empire had come with thousands of warships, each one bigger than a city block. Their plasma cannons shot down from space like lightning, turning entire neighborhoods into glass and smoke. Taemin's hands shook as he gripped the metal railing. His own ship groaned and creaked around him. Hull plates had been torn away by enemy fire, and sparks flew from broken control panels. The air tasted of burnt metal and fear. In the corridors behind him, the last survivors of the free worlds, coalition huddled together. Mothers held their children close. Soldiers who had fought for years sat quietly, their weapons useless against the massive fleet above. The communication officer, a young woman named Hye Jin, looked up from her station. With tears in her eyes, "Sir, we're getting reports from the other worlds. Kepler 7 has gone silent. New Terra stopped transmitting an hour ago. We're the last ones left." Taemin nodded slowly. He had known this day would come. The Vorthak Empire had been conquering worlds for 300 years. They never asked for surrender. They never took prisoners. They simply arrived, destroyed everything that moved, and took what they wanted from the ashes. 12 worlds had joined together to fight them, but one by one each had fallen silent. Through the window he could see the nearest Vorthak mothership. It looked like a giant metal spider with glowing red eyes. Smaller fighter ships swarmed around it like angry wasps. Every few seconds another beam of superheated plasma would lance down toward the planet below. Somewhere down there in the burning cities, millions of people were dying. "How long until they finish with the surface bombardment?" Taemin asked his tactical officer. "Maybe 6 hours, sir. Then they'll send down the harvester ships to strip mine what's left." Taemin closed his eyes. 6 hours. That's how long his species had left to exist. The Vorthak didn't just kill people. They erased entire civilizations so completely that it was like they had never existed at all. An explosion rocked the ship, and everyone grabbed onto something to keep from falling. Emergency lights flickered on and off. The artificial gravity wavered, making Taemin's stomach lurch. "Hull breach on deck 4, someone shouted. "Sealing emergency bulkheads." Taemin looked around at his crew. These brave people had followed him across the galaxy, fighting impossible odds. They deserved better than to die like trapped animals in a metal box. He opened his mouth to give the order for one final attack run, knowing it would be suicide, but hoping they might damage at least one enemy ship. That's when Hye Jin gasped and pointed at her screen. "Sir, long-range sensors are picking up something weird. There's a ship coming out of hyperspace, but it's not Vorthak. The computer can't identify it." Taemin frowned and walked over to look at the display. A single dot was moving toward them from the edge of the system. One ship against thousands. Either someone was incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. "Can you get a visual?" he asked. The main screen flickered and then showed them something impossible. The approaching ship looked nothing like any vessel in their databases. It was sleek and white, shaped like a teardrop, with no visible weapons or engines. It moved through space with a fluid grace that seemed almost alive. Most ships looked like they were built for war, all angles and armor plating and gun turrets. This one looked like it was built for dancing. "It's beautiful," whispered Hye-Jin, before anyone could respond. Every speaker on the bridge crackled to life. The voice that came through spoke in a language none of them had ever heard before, but somehow impossibly, they all understood every word perfectly. "This is Captain Jiwoo of the Eternal Dawn. All Vorthak vessels will cease hostile actions immediately and withdraw from this system. You have 30 seconds to comply." The bridge fell completely silent. Even the sparking control panels seemed to quiet down. Taemin stared at the beautiful white ship on the screen, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. One ship was demanding that an entire invasion fleet surrender. The Vorthak apparently found it as ridiculous as he did, because their response came quickly over the open channels, harsh laughter and crude insults in their guttural language. Captain Jiwoo's voice came again, calm and patient, like a teacher explaining something to a slow student. "Very well, you have made your choice." That's when the impossible began. The white ship moved forward, and Taemin watched something that shouldn't have been possible. The Eternal Dawn didn't rush toward the enemy fleet like a normal warship would. It didn't fire missiles or charge its weapons. Instead, it simply glided through space like a fish swimming through calm water. The first Vorthak destroyer that tried to intercept it just stopped. Not destroyed, not damaged. It literally froze in place like someone had pressed a pause button on the universe. Its red running lights flickered once and then went dark. The massive ship that had been moving at full combat speed was now floating motionless, completely dead in space. "What just happened?" Hyojin whispered, her fingers dancing over her sensor controls. "I'm not reading any weapons fire. No energy beams, no missiles, nothing." Taimin shook his head. He had been fighting space battles for 20 years, and nothing in his experience could explain what he was seeing. The white ship continued forward, passing the frozen destroyer like it was a piece of floating junk. A squadron of Vorthak fighters screamed toward the human vessel, their plasma cannons already charging. These were the same fighters that had torn through coalition defenses like they were made of paper. Each one carried enough firepower to level a city block. They never got the chance to fire. One moment they were racing forward at attack speed. The next, they were simply hanging in, space-like ornaments on a tree. 12 deadly war machines reduced to harmless decorations in the blink of an eye. Their engines were still glowing, their weapon systems still charged, but they might as well have been carved from stone. Captain Jiwoo's voice filled the communication channels again, and this time every ship in the system could hear her clearly. Her words carried the weight of absolute certainty. "We are human. We have watched your war from the edges of this galaxy. We have seen the worlds you have burned and the lives you have taken. It ends now." The massive Vorthak mothership, the spider-like vessel that Taimin had been watching, began to turn its enormous bulk toward the small white ship. Its main guns, each one the size of a building, started to glow with deadly energy. If those weapons fired, they would vaporize anything within 1,000 kilometers. They never got the chance. The mothership's guns simply went dark. Not damaged, not overloaded. They just stopped working, as if someone had reached inside the ship and flipped an off switch. The massive vessel began to drift, powerless and helpless. "This is impossible," breathed the tactical officer. "You can't just turn off a ship's weapons from the outside. The physics don't work that way." But the Eternal Dawn wasn't finished demonstrating that physics was apparently more of a suggestion than a rule. The human ship turned toward the burning planet below, where Vorthak plasma bombardment had been raging for hours. Taimin could see the glow of fires from orbit, the angry red spots where cities used to be. The ship didn't descend toward the planet. Instead, it simply looked at it. The fires went out. Not gradually, not slowly. They just stopped burning all at once, as if someone had thrown a blanket over the entire world. The angry red glow faded, replaced by the soft blue and green that Taimin remembered from before the war. "Sensors are showing impossible readings from the planet," Hyojin reported, her voice shaking. "The atmospheric composition is changing. Oxygen levels are rising. The radiation from the plasma bombardment is just disappearing." Through the bridge windows, they could see something even more incredible happening in space around them. The Vorthak fleet, hundreds of massive warships that had been spreading death and destruction, were being pushed away from the planet by invisible hands. Not destroyed, not exploded, just gently moved aside like a parent cleaning toys off a child's bed. The ships tumbled slowly through space, their crews probably screaming in confusion and terror inside their metal hulls. Some of the smaller vessels were being pushed so far away that they disappeared beyond the edge of sensor range. But the most incredible sight was what happened to the local star. The sun that lit this system had been dying for decades, its light growing dim and weak. The Vorthak had chosen this system partly because they knew the star wouldn't last much longer anyway. As Taimin watched in amazement, the star began to burn brighter. Not the angry, unstable brightness of a star about to explode, but the steady, warm glow of a sun in its prime. Within minutes, the dying light that had barely warmed the planets became a strong, healthy flame that would burn for millions more years. "The star is regenerating," the science officer reported in a stunned voice. "Nuclear fusion is stabilizing. Solar output is increasing to optimal levels. This should take millions of years, but it's happening in real time." The white ship hung in space like a conductor directing an orchestra of reality itself. Broken moons around distant planets began to reform, their shattered pieces flowing back together like water running uphill. Asteroid fields that had been scattered by ancient collisions gathered themselves into new worlds, and through it all, Captain Jiwoo's voice remained calm and patient, as if reshaping the fundamental forces of the universe was something she did. Every day, the Vorthak Empire will withdraw immediately. You will not return to this system or any system under our protection. This is your only warning. The Vorthak fleet that had terrorized the galaxy for 3 centuries was running away like scared children. Admiral Tae-min watched through his bridge windows as the massive warships that had seemed unstoppable just hours before now fled in complete panic. Their engines burned at maximum power as they desperately tried to escape the small white ship that had made them powerless. The largest, Vorthak Dreadnought, a ship so big it had its own gravity field, was spinning out of control as it retreated. Tae-min could see smaller vessels breaking away from the main fleet, their commanders apparently deciding that staying together was more dangerous than being alone. Some ships were firing their weapons wildly into empty space, as if they thought they could somehow hurt an enemy they couldn't even understand. "Sir, we're intercepting Vorthak communications," Hyejin reported, adjusting her headset. They're screaming. The commanders are ordering full retreat to their home systems. Some captains are refusing orders and jumping to hyperspace on their own. The fear in the alien voices was clear even through the translation software. These were warriors who had conquered hundreds of worlds without ever knowing defeat. Now, they sounded like children afraid of the dark, but Tae-min's attention was drawn away from the fleeing enemy fleet by something even more incredible happening below. The eternal dawn had begun to descend toward the planet, moving slowly and carefully, like a doctor approaching a wounded patient. Where the human ship passed, miracles followed. The capital city of New Seoul had been completely destroyed by plasma bombardment 6 hours earlier. Tae-min had watched the orbital strike himself, seen the buildings melt and the streets turn to glass. The city that had been home to 12 million people had become a crater of cooling rock and ash. Now, as the white ship moved over the ruins, the city was rebuilding itself. It started slowly at first. Tiny fragments of debris began to move, drifting together like iron filings drawn to a magnet. Puddles of melted metal started to flow upward, reforming into the steel beams and concrete blocks they had been before the bombardment. Glass that had been vaporized began to condense out of the air, forming windows and walls. "This is impossible," the science officer whispered. "Matter doesn't behave like this. You can't just reverse atomic destruction." But the impossible was happening anyway. Buildings rose from their own ashes, growing like fast-forwarded plants. Streets that had been blasted into craters smoothed themselves out, the broken asphalt flowing together like healing skin. Parks and gardens sprouted from bare ground, fully grown trees appearing where there had been nothing but dust minutes before. The most amazing part was watching the scorch marks disappear, the black stains where plasma fire had burned everything, to nothing, simply faded away, like someone was erasing them with an invisible cloth. Green grass grew where radioactive glass had been. Clean water filled reservoirs that had been boiled dry. Through the ship's long-range cameras, they could see the same thing happening all across the planet. 12 cities had been destroyed in the bombardment. Now all 12 were rebuilding themselves, simultaneously, rising from destruction like something out of a fairy tale. "Sir, I'm getting life sign readings from the surface," the sensor operator called out excitedly. "People are coming out of the emergency shelters. They're alive down there." Tae-min felt tears in his eyes. When the bombardment had started, he had given up hope for anyone on the surface. Plasma weapons didn't leave survivors. They turned everything to ash and radioactive dust. But somehow, impossibly, people had lived through it. The communication system crackled to life with voices from the planet below. At first, it was just a few scattered transmissions, people testing their radios and trying to figure out what had happened. Then it became a flood of voices, families calling for each other, rescue teams coordinating efforts, city officials trying to restore order. "This is Mayor Kyung-ho in New Seoul," came one clear voice. "I don't know how this is possible, but our city is rebuilding itself. The dead are returning to life. The injured are healing. Whatever is happening, it's a miracle." Tamin looked back at the tactical display where the last of the Vorthak ships were disappearing into hyperspace. The fleet that had darkened the skies of a dozen worlds was gone, scattered to the far corners of the galaxy by a single human vessel. But the retreat of the enemy was nothing compared to what was happening on the other worlds. Long-range sensors were picking up the same impossible restoration on every planet the Vorthak had attacked. Dead worlds were coming back to life. Poisoned atmospheres were cleaning themselves. Broken moons were reforming in orbit. On Kepler 7, where the Vorthak had strip-mined the entire surface, new continents were rising from the sea. The toxic waste that had made the planet uninhabitable was simply disappearing, leaving behind fertile soil and clean water. New Terra, which had been bombarded until its crust cracked, was healing those wounds. The planet's surface was smoothing out, the angry red glow of exposed magma cooling into new land that would soon bloom with life. The human ship seemed to be everywhere at once, moving between worlds faster than should have been possible, bringing restoration wherever it went. It was as if Captain Jiwoo had decided that the entire war had been a mistake that needed to be corrected, and she was simply erasing it from history. The most feared military force in the galaxy had been defeated without a fight, and their victims were being restored to life by powers beyond imagination. 3 days after the impossible rescue, Admiral Taemin received a message that changed everything he thought he knew about the universe. It was an invitation from Captain Jiwoo to come aboard the Eternal Dawn, along with Commander So Young, the brave woman who had led the underground resistance on New Sol. The shuttle that came to pick them up looked as strange as the main ship, smooth and white, with no visible engines or weapons. When Taemin stepped inside, he expected to see advanced technology beyond his understanding. Instead, the interior looked almost comfortable. The walls were a warm cream color and soft. Light came from everywhere and nowhere at once. It felt more like walking into someone's home than boarding a military vessel. Captain Jiwoo was waiting for them in what she called the observation lounge. She looked surprisingly normal. A woman in her 30s with kind eyes and black hair, pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore a plain white uniform with no decorations or badges. If Taemin had passed her on the street, he would have thought she was a teacher or a doctor, not someone who could reshape reality with a thought. "Please, sit down," she said, gesturing to chairs that formed themselves out of the floor as they watched. "I know you have questions." Commander So Young, who had spent years fighting guerrilla warfare against the Vorthak, was the first to speak. "What are you? How did you do those things? That kind of power. It's like you're gods." Captain Jiwoo smiled sadly. "We're not gods. We're just very, very old humans who learned some difficult lessons the hard way." She touched the wall, and it became transparent, showing them a view of space that seemed to stretch on forever. But this wasn't the space around the planet they knew. The stars were different, arranged in patterns Taemin had never seen before. "This is our original galaxy," Jiwoo explained, "or what's left of it. We called it the Milky Way, and it was our home for millions of years." The view changed, showing them worlds of incredible beauty, cities that seemed to grow like plants, reaching toward the sky in graceful spirals, oceans that sparkled with bioluminescent life, forests where the trees themselves glowed with soft rainbow light. "We weren't always like this," Jiwoo continued. "For most of our history we were just like you. We fought wars, made mistakes, struggled to survive. We had countries and governments, and all the messy complications that come with being mortal beings trying to figure out how to live together." The HFY images changed again, showing darker scenes, war, destruction, planets burning in space. But we also had something else. We never stopped trying to be better. Every time we made a mistake, we learned from it. Every time we faced a problem, we worked together to solve it. It took us thousands of years, but eventually we figured out how to live in peace. Taemin leaned forward. "What happened? Why did you leave?" The sadness in Jiwoo's eyes deepened. "We weren't the only intelligent species in our galaxy. There were others, and one of them. They were like the Vorthak, but worse. They called themselves the Devourers, and they consumed everything in their path, not just planets or resources. They ate entire solar systems, turning the matter and energy into more of themselves. The wall showed them horrors beyond imagination, stars going dark, worlds cracking apart, space itself seeming to tear like fabric. We tried to fight them the normal way at first. Ships, weapons, military tactics, nothing worked. They were too strong, too numerous, and they grew stronger with every victory. So we made a choice that changed us forever. So Young gripped the arms of her chair. What kind of choice? We chose to transcend our physical limitations. We learned to exist as pure consciousness, to manipulate matter and energy directly with our minds. It was the only way to match the Devourer's power. The images showed the transformation. Humans who looked normal one moment, then seemed to become living light the next. They moved through space without ships, reshaped planets with gestures, turned the Devourer's own weapons against them. We won, Jiwoo said quietly, but the victory came at a terrible cost. Our galaxy was so damaged by the war that it could no longer support life. We had saved ourselves, but we had lost our home. Forever. Taemin was beginning to understand. So you came here. We became refugees, searching for a new place to call home. We found this galaxy and saw that it was young and full of life. We could have taken it for ourselves. We had the power. But we had learned something important from our war with the Devourers. She stood up and walked to the transparent wall, looking out at the stars of their adopted galaxy. Power without wisdom is destruction. We had become so powerful that we could remake entire worlds, but that didn't give us the right to rule over other species. So we made a sacred promise. We would watch, we would learn, but we would never interfere with the natural development of the species we found here. But you did interfere, So Young pointed out. You saved us. Jiwoo turned back to them and they could see the weight of countless years in her expression. We kept that promise for millions of years. We watched civilizations rise and fall. We saw beauty and cruelty, love and hatred, the same patterns we had experienced in our own development. And we stayed hidden, even when our hearts broke for the suffering we witnessed. She gestured around them at the ship itself. This vessel isn't just a ship. It's a fragment of human civilization. Inside its quantum matrix live the digitized consciousnesses of billions of humans who refuse to give up their connection to physical reality. We could have become pure energy, existing only as thought, but we chose to remain corporeal because we remembered what it was like to be mortal. The truth hit Taemin like a physical blow. You're all here, your entire species. What's left of us, yes. And we've been watching your war with the Vorthak for decades, following our sacred vow of non-interference, even as worlds burned and species died, until 3 days ago. What changed? So Young asked. Jiwoo's voice became firm, resolute. We realized that sometimes the greatest evil isn't action, it's inaction when you have the power to prevent suffering. The Vorthak weren't just conquering worlds, they were erasing entire civilizations from existence. We couldn't stand by and watch genocide when we had the power to stop it. The massive starship Eternal Dawn hummed with energy as its crew made final preparations to leave. Captain Jiwoo stood on the bridge, looking out at the stars one last time. The galaxy they were leaving behind was different now, free from the iron grip of the empire that had ruled for so long. Jiwoo pressed a button, and her voice echoed across communication channels to every planet, every space station, every small settlement that could receive the signal. Her words were simple but powerful. She told them about her own people's journey, how they had once been just like them, living under oppression, dreaming of better days. She spoke of the dark times when hope seemed lost, when fighting back felt impossible. We know your struggle, she said, her voice carrying the weight of personal experience. We remember what it feels like to wake up each day wondering if things will ever change. We remember hiding in shadows, whispering about freedom when no one could hear. Across the galaxy, beings of all kinds stopped what they were doing to listen. On desert planets where moisture farmers worked under twin suns, they paused and looked up. In underwater cities where aquatic species swam through crystal domes, they gathered around communication screens. In asteroid mining colonies where workers had known nothing but hardship, they held their breath as they heard these words from strangers who had become their saviors. Jiwoo continued her message, telling them how her people had eventually found their strength, not through advanced weapons or military might, but through unity and determination. She explained how they had learned that even the smallest act of defiance could spark change, that every person who refused to give up added to a wave that would eventually sweep away injustice. The crew of the Eternal Dawn had spent years traveling between stars, learning about different civilizations, understanding that freedom meant different things to different species. For some, it was the right to speak their own language without fear. For others, it was the ability to practice their traditions, or simply to choose their own path in life. You might feel small, Jiwoo's message continued. You might think your actions don't matter, but we're living proof that they do. Every choice to help a neighbor, every refusal to accept cruelty as normal, every moment you choose hope over despair, these things matter more than you know. On the bridge, her crew members nodded silently. Each of them had their own story of struggle and survival. The navigator had grown up in refugee camps, moving from planet to planet. The chief engineer had lost family members to the Empire's prisons. The medical officer had treated countless victims of oppression. They had all chosen to dedicate their lives to this mission, not for glory or revenge, but because they remembered what it felt like to need help and have none come. As Jiwoo spoke, she shared practical wisdom too. She told them about the importance of building communities, of sharing resources and knowledge. She explained how underground networks had helped her people survive, how coded messages and secret meetings had kept hope alive during the darkest times. She urged them to document their histories, to remember both their struggles and victories, so future generations would understand the price of freedom. The message reached places where the Empire's propaganda had been strongest. Citizens who had been taught to fear outsiders, to report suspicious behavior, to trust only official sources of information. They heard Jiwoo's words and felt something shift inside them. Some wept openly, finally understanding that their doubts about the system weren't signs of weakness, but sparks of conscience. In the weeks following the Empire's fall, the recording of Jiwoo's message would be shared countless times. Parents would play it for their children, explaining that these were the people who had made their new life possible. Teachers would use it in classrooms to discuss what courage really meant. It would be translated into hundreds of languages and dialects, adapted into songs and stories, painted on walls and carved into monuments. But now, as Jiwoo finished speaking, she looked around at her crew one final time. They had completed their mission, but their work would never truly be done. Somewhere else in the vast universe, other civilizations might be suffering, waiting for someone to believe in them, to remind them that darkness was never permanent. Remember, Jiwoo concluded her message, in your moments of doubt, when the path ahead seems impossible, someone out there believes in you. Someone knows you're stronger than you think. We were once where you are now, and if we could find our way to freedom, so can you. Look at the stars and know you're not alone. We may be leaving, but what we've started here will continue through you. The communication channel closed. On the bridge, there was a moment of profound silence. Then, quietly, the pilot engaged the hyperdrive. The Eternal Dawn began to glow with an otherworldly light as it prepared to jump to hyperspace. Through the viewports, the stars seemed to stretch and blur. As the ship vanished in a flash of light, it left behind more than just freed planets and broken chains. It left behind the knowledge that ordinary people could do extraordinary things, that hope could survive even the longest night, and that somewhere among the stars there would always be those who remembered what it meant to fight for others. This galaxy would never be the same, and in the darkness between stars, the legacy of the Eternal Dawn would live on in every act of kindness, every moment of courage, and every person who chose to believe that tomorrow could be better than today.